My next guest is Dr. Jim Marshall. Jim is the author of Right from the Start, The Essential Guide to Implementing School Initiatives, and a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University, where he serves as a senior director for the EDD program in PK through 12 school leadership. Jim's lifelong work lies at the intersection of people and the organization in which they work and optimizing the synergy that fertile convergence holds. His scholarship, teaching, and consulting combine our understanding of human performance and organizational development to assess strengths, devise strategy, and improve even the most vexing of challenges. Engagements have found him evaluating virtual reality delivered training for active shooter containment, devising strategy that has improved the community-focused impacts realized by the national network of over 150 public television stations. And his book that we're going to be talking about on the podcast today, Right from the Start, summarizes lessons learned through evaluation of hundreds of programs, both in the public and private sectors. That book was released in May 2023. His newest book, Fixing Education Initiatives in Crisis, 24 Go-To Strategies, came out in summer of 2024. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you so much. It's awesome to be here, and I always love any chance to talk about programs and initiatives in schools.
Well, we'll start off with a story I ask everybody to share at the beginning. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, one of the things I always think about when we talk programs and initiatives is the fact that if you're a school leader and you really think about it, your life is the compilation of all of those programs and initiatives. Not only are you leading a staff of educators, parapros likely, and other allied supports, but you are orchestrating kind of a symphony of programs in your school. And that is your day-to-day work. So programs surround us. I want to tell the story real quick of an allied organization, actually a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., who exists purely and largely to deliver and educate folks. And so I will not divulge the exact name of the organization, but recognize it as one of the largest literary libraries in the world. And so I had a fantastic friend and colleague, former assistant superintendent at DC Public Schools, go into this organization as education director. And she quickly realized and consulted me that she walked into a department, an education department serving schools, running over 60 individual programs. By all measures, a lot. And as an educational leader, if you're leading a school or a district, it might be familiar to you because oftentimes we have more programs than we know what to deal with. Well, her observation at first glance was, look, there may be over 60 programs going on, and I'm not exactly sure any one thing I know about them. But what I am certain about for the compilation of 60 plus is we can't be doing all of them well. There's no way. And when she then shared with me that they were being implemented by a total of 3 staff members, so 20 plus programs each, her immediate response was, we need to look at these programs. We need to do some quick risk analysis on them to figure out which ones are really core to our work and which ones are extra that maybe we need to consider prioritizing others over. And then also the whole idea of de-implementation, which is something in both of the books you mentioned, but de-implementing can mean combining programs. It can mean right-sizing programs. It doesn't always mean getting rid of programs. And so finding that synergy and bringing everything together, and that is exactly what we did. We did some kind of, I would call it hybrid program evaluation / needs assessment, and went to the schools, the educational leaders, the teachers, the students, and understood those 60 plus programs from their perspective. And that's how she then moved forward in optimizing the programs she was responsible for to this day in that organization, but most importantly, heightening the impact of the ones that move forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of like a lot of schools and districts, and if you're at the state level, see these types of things, right? There are very few staff members to drive some of these programs, to evaluate if they're effective and to follow up with schools. And what got me interested in talking to you about your book right from the start, The Essential Guide to Implementing School Initiatives, is that, I've been in several different districts in the Denver area. And a lot of the time, as a staff member at a school, these initiatives often fall flat. They might have a plan that's about 3-year plan, maybe 3 to 5 years. Sometimes there's no follow through. And then, the teachers are trained on something and it's kind of for naught. So, would you say that your book is more for district or school leaders or both? And what are the expectations when somebody has a program that they want to implement in terms of a time frame?
Yeah, I appreciate the time frame question because it's so critical to any of this work. I would argue that right from the start, that Essential Guide to School Initiatives really can speak to educator at any level. Because as a former classroom teacher myself, I know oftentimes I was responsible for a program, both implementing it and sometimes, and I would argue this is increasingly true, we as the teaching staff were invited or
Yeah.
voluntold perhaps to create new programs. And so right from the start, actually, the idea of right from the start it comes from the idea that needs assessment is the most critical first step. Until you understand a situation through the eyes of the people it involves, likely the participants and the implementers of your program, until you understand that kind of in a 360-degree way, it's really hard to make sure you're going to hit the right target. And down the road, that implementation not only will be done well and effectively, but it will result in impact. So I'm sure you, like I, can point to any number of initiatives over our careers that we were involved in. And the thought that entered our mind was, wow, did they even talk to any of us before this was done to us?
Yeah.
Not with us or for us, but done to us. And then, no surprise, we go back into our classrooms or wherever we're working, and quickly, nothing
Yeah.
changes. And so the whole idea of right from the start is truly understanding the situation from the beginning so that whatever you design, not only do you know where you're headed through really well-defined outcomes based on needs and strengths, by the way, of the current situation, but also that you understand the people involved in a deep way so that what you create is not a creation of your own imagination or assumption around a group of people, but truly of their based on their strengths, what they're doing well, and using strengths to leverage that to take us where we want to go. Well defined where we want to go, as opposed to talking in generalities about where we want to end up, and then we always are surprised, like, oh, well, why didn't it do what we said, what we thought? And then you ask people, what did you think the initiative was supposed to do? And you get 10 different answers. Well, of course, that means we could end up in 10 different places. So that's how I kind of think of the books. Yes, obviously, school leaders and district leaders, these both books are designed for them. But I know too, as a classroom teacher, I really could have benefited more from needs assessment and reflective time to understand, exactly what I was designing, and the time to think through what is the most effective solution here. Not only if it's say it's curriculum, but instruction, support materials, getting buy-in from the people around me to keep this initiative going. And that's the second half of the answer to your question. How long does an initiative or a program need to be in place before we make some judgment about its worth? Interestingly enough, in the literature, there is not a definitive answer on that, but many have kind of opined that 3 years is about the minimum to get a new program or an initiative actually being implemented with consistency. So if it takes 3 years for that, my argument would be you probably need a couple more years in order to truly have an accurate gauge on impact. We can see some leading indicators of impact early on, and certainly from the beginning. we can evaluate to see if the program is being implemented as designed, the fidelity question, or as I like to say, the F word, because it has such a bad connotation to educators. But folks, fidelity is like teacher clarity. It's
Yeah.
all of us understanding what we're doing. So I would argue that if it's a significant initiative, it needs to be in place for at least 3 years and beyond to really give it the opportunity to bear that fruit that we so carefully designed the program to eventually produce.
So, why are there some initiatives that don't really get off the ground? Is it because they don't take those 3 years and then follow through? Once let's say you have a team from a school, or if it's a district initiative, several teams for different schools, and maybe they're doing this as a pilot and it's a 5 year pilot program. And maybe not all the schools are doing it as much with fidelity. So, how would you keep an initiative off to get it going and keep it going, especially if the district is investing a lot of money and wants it maybe to be done district wide, but we're only doing it with a few pilot schools to start off?
Yeah, and I do think the phased in implementation, and again, some of this is, well, a lot of it is contextual and situational, but as a concept, the phased in implementation where you pilot in at least obviously one, but a couple of schools to understand the initiative first before scaling it across a district, that has a lot of benefits. But to go back to kind of the beginning of your question, which I really appreciate, the needs assessment step truly is where we understand the participants, and in most cases, that's the students, the people we're there for, but it could be parents. It could be an initiative around professional learning for teaching staff. So that needs assessment is the first step to truly understand what's needed and where the current strengths lie, because it is my belief, and born over evaluating 20 years worth of programs, is my belief that the more the initiative matches the needs as well as the strengths of the people implementing it, the more likely it is to stay in place long enough to actually have an impact. And so I think that right there is critical, and a non-negotiable part of this. In the crisis book that came out this summer that you mentioned, that book really talks about 6 different types of crises with the assumption that you have a good program. So all of the other things that get in the way, which is a big part of, I think, your question, is what's going to keep us from keeping on to the point where we truly give this a fair shake. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of things that get in the way that we can preemptively try to hold off. And that includes what I call the attention span crisis, where people just forget you're doing this initiative. It's like, oh, well, we haven't talked about it in 2 years, so probably don't need it anymore. You've got to be a good PR agent for your initiative and make the case to stay the course to the point of impact. And that's just one example. But I think to finish answering this question, the idea of scaling is one that's fascinating to me. And I think of scaling both as growing in size, but also scaling is like scaling a mountain, because it's going to get tougher the further you go. But the idea is if you pilot in a couple of schools first, and then you look at what's working, you look at what isn't working, the fidelity question you bring up, which is an important thing to consider, all the dimensions of fidelity. But to me, the big question in a pilot, like you described, is based on the way we design this program or initiative, what are the non-negotiable pieces that have to be implemented as we design? And what can we adjust for context? How can we tailor this initiative for school A versus B versus C? And I think that is one of the main points of a pilot before scaling, is to understand what gets in the way of fidelitous implementation, but also understand how we can contextualize it. Because in your example, the teachers, let's say, from school B may be at a very different place than school A. And so one of the ways to keep that initiative moving forward is not to just impose it upon them, but truly make its implementation reflect the context, needs, strengths, et cetera, of each of the schools involved.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. Um, Sometimes there are initiatives that are tried in schools, might have been, partially implemented and failed 10 years ago. And then new leaders at the same school want to try it again. And there's staff members that are still there. And they're like, well, we used to do that. But, and then they have to be retrained and whatever it may be. What do you say to those leaders? I mean, sometimes it's maybe just the school wide initiative that's being decided upon by the admin team at a school and not district.
Yeah, and I think, that kind of top down as you described.
Yeah.
I grew up out of grad school the first time. My degree is in educational technology, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, technology was increasing in the classrooms, and I often called it the B-52 model, where it's like they just fly the plane over, drop off all of the tech, and then the
Uh,
plane keeps going and you expect the world to change. And then when you go in as an evaluator and you're like, oh, I can't wait to see all the great things we're doing with the technology. We open a cabinet in the back of the room and the software is still shrink wrapped. So, and that is not only is that a real story, but that is a real multiple set of stories because I would often see that. And it became literally an exercise as the evaluator in needs assessment because I can't evaluate something that's not implemented really. So I need to figure out why it's not implemented. It like flips everything upside down, which to me is one of the reasons why I'm such a strong advocate of the needs assessment on the front end. But I think more specifically to the idea of an initiative that was tried years ago and now it's coming back. And again, I think, and I don't intend to sound like a broken record, but again, I would say you need to give voice to the people involved. You need to give time to hear their lived experience with that initiative to understand what went sideways the first time around. And then you need to, as the person implementing the program or overseeing its implementation, you need to be responsive to the voices of the people involved. So it truly, to me, would depend on what I hear from the teaching staff. And if one of the things I hear is that it's being done to us rather than with us or for us, then I really need to do some deep thinking and data collection and strategy determination around how can I better align this initiative with the needs of the staff and their perspectives and begin the change process to help them understand the relevance of the initiative to their current life. In other words, to cut to the chase, what's in it for them? That's the big question to answer at the prospect of trying to relaunch an initiative that didn't take hold.
Um, Perhaps there is a team that is going to look at maybe how other schools are doing this initiative, and they want to either observe or work with a school within a district or a school within the same city. How can observation help when you're in the process of that 3 year plus implementation?
Well, I think that observation and understanding the program in different settings can be very important for those who are taking responsibility for its implementation. But I also would suggest to you that in part what you just described is a probable strategy for helping to build the value of the initiative with the teaching staff if it is reliant upon the teachers to implement it. So by helping them see the relevance of the initiative through the eyes of other educators, perhaps in a sibling school within the district, somewhere where it's taken hold, maybe they're a year ahead, and you can see why the initiative matters, and you can talk to people, and you might even hear, well, you know what? We did this 10 years ago, it didn't work, but now we're in the second year of this initiative, and it was changed this way, that way, and the next. And now it really seems to fit in with what we're doing here. if you can help them see how it complements other things already going on in the school, like it's not just one more thing to do, but it really is enhancing and in magnitude building the work and our commitment to whatever our priorities are. I think all of those things work. But in the end, when you and I'm guessing, certainly it's true for me, think about great teaching strategies we learned and things that we learn not to do, I would argue that many of those come from the observations throughout our life of
Yeah.
starting with seminal K-12 educators we had through college and then collegiality as we've watched peers in their classrooms. So I think there's much to be gained from that, including strategy around implementing programs.
Yeah, so there's a lot more people can read in that book and also the crisis book. How are those two books different in terms of like if you're looking at implementing initiatives versus when would you use a crisis book?
So it's interesting. I almost feel like the books were written in reverse order because I firmly believe the crisis book truly falls out of my 20 plus years evaluating programs of all kinds, both in K-12 systems and beyond. But it is written for K-12 systems, and it offers 24 different tools, all related to categorized by the 6 types of crisis, from failing to get smart, I call it, which is basically doing needs assessment, to outcomes through collecting data, to de-implementation and scaling, all of those different types of crises that can happen. This book is born of what I saw in the field, and I know at that crisis point, these are some of the tools I've used with districts I've partnered with to help them understand the situation and plot their way out. So I actually love the crisis book, believe it or not, as a starting point. I've had 2 people contact me this week who had picked up the book, and both of them said, hey, look, we suffer from programitis, which I call an inflammation of programs. Programitis in our schools and our districts, like we're doing way too much. And these tools are helping us take a look at what we're doing and really forcing us to think about how do we prioritize, because we would rather do less with more impact than more with less impact. And
Yeah.
so things like de-implementation, which again, I've talked a little bit about, but it's covered in the crisis book with a tool as well as the first book. But the de-implementation literature comes from pediatric medicine and the idea of discontinuing ineffective care. Well, while I believe firmly in the work of medical doctors that keep us in existence on this earth, I would argue that as educators, in the long run, we have even more of an impact on the students around us over their entire lifespan. So applying some of the same thinking to programs makes a lot of sense to me. What is low value? What is actually some of our practices that these programs, they might actually be doing harm in some cases, or they're not returning an impact that is measurable against the cost of implementing. And so both books cover de-implementation, but the crisis book in particular has a tool for thinking about what here really is working, what isn't working, and how do we prioritize. So I think that the crisis book is a great way to jump into all of this. And it's not lost on me that if you heed some of the advice in the crisis book, proactively, you actually can use it to avoid crisis. I say in the introduction, it's like a prophylactic against crisis. And then the right from the start book, the essential guide, that really is soup to nuts, starting from the very beginning. How do you do it right to give you the greatest chance of eventually ending up with an initiative that not only fits in and complements what you're already doing, but is most likely to yield a predictable positive result. And so that book is about 2 to 3 times as long, but still a whole set of tools in there to help you in each stage, from needs assessment through program design to program evaluation.
Yeah, that's good for people who are considering maybe looking at either book before they start thinking about initiatives for next school year, or just looking into some of those programs or the programitis syndrome, like you said, that when you have to evaluate which ones to keep. So we've talked a lot about some of your writing, but also you do work with school districts, you coach. So what is some of the work that you do in terms of across the United States, working with schools K-12? What does that look like? And you also do a little bit of nonprofit work as well.
Yeah, and so all of my work is within the learning education space, and most of it relates back to or takes place in a PK-12 sort of setting. A lot of times I am doing program evaluation, which of course is the experience largely that led to these books. That can be for funded projects, it can be for district initiated projects, anything where they really want to take a good hard look at impact and understand and optimize the programs or initiatives that are happening. Um, of late, and I love that this is happening because it for 20 years has not been the thing, but of late, I've had a handful of districts contact me for needs assessment. And I love that because as a program evaluator who's seen programs that never got implemented, I love the idea of needs assessment. And obviously, I believe strongly in it. But making a bit of calculated investment on the front end to really dial in and potentially benefit even more of an impact than we would otherwise get on once we have a program in place. So most of my work is on one of the two ends of that. And I will be the first to say evaluation should not happen at the end. It should be part of the initiative from the beginning. How are we going to know we're on track when we start implementing? How are we going to measure success? What are the outcomes we're looking for? And when can we expect them? So again, my work largely follows what I've just described in terms of a consultative or thought partner sort of relationship with district leaders as they conceptualize initiatives, or I will say in two cases currently, as they think about all of the initiatives they have going on in the district and asking the hard question about, is this the right constellation of initiatives, or would it be better if some of these stars shine brighter and others maybe begin to dim? So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think, like you said, it's really looking at how maybe the needs, like you said, what do they want to change, and evaluate how they're going to do that through what program before they even start the process, right? So I'm glad to hear that there are many schools that are looking at that first piece before they end up doing more. So you are speaking at Learning Forward, which I'll also be speaking at in December, which by the time this episode's out, that will have passed. But you also are doing some work, you said early January or next spring, in terms of working with Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey, talking about the rigor book and rigorous instruction, implementing rigorous instruction. So what does some of that upcoming speaking look like?
yeah, so we have a book coming out in early January. It's called Rigor Unveiled. And it's the whole idea of kind of reclaiming the word rigor, because believe it or not, it's even more in surveys you can look up online. It's even more often mentioned as a word people dislike, educators dislike, than fidelity. So rigor is one that often is used evaluatively. And yet it doesn't seem to have a common definition. And there's a lot of myths around rigor, like more homework, students not doing well must equal rigor. And so we really dedicated this book to unveiling rigor in a different light. And we suggest that rigor is the combined sort of impact of relationships, instruction, goals, organization, and relevance. Starting with relationships, because that's the foundation of everything. And so that book comes out at the beginning of the year. And we're doing some workshops on that book, as well as producing, actually, we just finished producing its being finalized an online course on rigor that I'm excited about because it includes a lot of video from classrooms and learning to spot some of these high value practices when they happen in classrooms. And so that is a lot of the work that we have going on. As you mentioned in Learning Forward, Doug Fisher and I will be hosting a panel of our former doc students talking about implementing programs and 3 different programs. Actually, one of them I love. She is a doc student of mine who did a needs assessment on kids with adverse childhood experiences and how to best serve them in the programs within her district, making recommendations for modifications. So yeah, so there's a lot going on. It's super exciting. Keeps me super busy. But again, most of it goes back to the design of really good, effective programs. When we're talking about rigorous instruction, I mean, that instruction is a program. So we've got to do everything we can to optimize that because that's what we're here for, is to help the kids in our schools and districts be the best they can be.
And when that workshop's available, where can people find it?
That'll be available through Corwin, the publisher of both of these books, as well as Rigor. And then, of course, Doug and Nancy have quite a few books through Corwin. But yeah, so that'll be available through Corwin's website.
Great, great. Well, we've had a great conversation today around program implementation, de-implementation, rigor, and also just why some things don't get off the ground and how to avoid that, and really hearing the voice of those who are actually doing the work. So out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think the top point that comes to my mind, and you just said it, so I'll double down on that, is take the time to listen to the people involved. Even if you're at the point of crisis, and maybe even more if you're at the point of crisis, go back, retrace your steps, and talk to the people involved. It makes so much sense, and yet, like many things in the world that make sense, we often fail to do it because we're pressed in so many directions. But until people can see themselves in that program clearly and accurately, I would argue you are increasing the chance of barriers getting in the way. And so whatever we can do to help, if they're classroom programs, help those responsible for implementing them see the how and the why. And then those experiencing them, the students, see themselves reflected in that, in the program, and also see the how and the why, frankly. I think that comes from listening to the people involved, at least initially. And certainly if you've started veering off track, time to circle back and really do some significant and intentional listening.
Yeah, so important. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Oh, thanks. So my website, jamesmmarshall.com. But if that's hard to remember, if you just search James Marshall and SDSU, San Diego State University, you'll come to my university website too.
Okay, great. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today and hearing about your passion in helping schools and districts really hone in on the work of needs assessment and initiatives. And not fail at that because really those in the trenches working with kids are the ones that want to see these move forward if they put the work in. So thanks so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.